First off, I'd like to welcome Delegate Landis and Delegate Thomas in the room before Mr. Regimbal speaks today. Also, there's green cards on your chairs when you sit down. Please fill those out. Give them to Katie or leave them at the lobby desk. Getting into things, you all aren't here to listen to me, so let me introduce Mr. Jim Regimbal, who comes to us with 30 years of experience in state and local budget and tax policy analysis. Co-founder of Fiscal Analytics, and will be sharing with us his expertise in state and local budget and tax policy issues. So with that, Mr. Regimbal, take it away. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ashley, for your introduction. It's great to be here this morning. I see a lot of familiar and friendly faces. I'm glad about that. This is always a tough topic. Unfortunately, I've been doing it a long time, so a lot of it's boiled in my brain. What I'd like to do first is sort of give you the general overview as I see it this year. I think this year is a real inflection point year. I think the governor's speech sort of gave you a sense of that. We have a good economy. We've come out of a situation a couple of years ago that wasn't nearly as good, and so things are on the upswing, and so I call it really a year of opportunity. I think we have an opportunity to make some real decisions, some different decisions. Throw in the fact that we have federal tax reform that is sort of forcing a lot of these decisions, I think, on the General Assembly, that it's going to make a very interesting year, and I think Delegate Landis and Delegate Thomas would probably agree with that. So the general picture is that, yes, we do have some budget holes to fill. I wasn't surprised, actually, as the Finance Committee meeting was mentioned. I've been skeptical about the Medicaid forecast for a while, and it seems to get upwardly revised a lot. The managed care savings didn't come in as expected. We have some other unbudgeted expenses like the VITA settlement, the Micron expansion incentives that were promised, Hurricane Florence, though not as big as what people thought, and there's other agency and obligations. Maybe it's not $900 million, maybe I'm a little pessimistic there, but it's probably at least $700 to $900 million in mandatory have-to-do budget hole filling. So that's the bad news. The good news is we had a $500 million revenue surplus. Most of that went into the reserve funds, which will help shore up our state's liquidity if we have another downturn, which it always happens. The General Assembly has been conservative in what it's done with this extra money. It's building our reserves back up to about 5% by the end of 2020. Keep in mind, though, many other AAA-rated states have 8 to 10% reserves, so there's still pressure potentially to put more money into reserve. The good news is, because of this surplus that we had last year, we have a higher base of revenues. We only need 1.4% revenue growth in the general fund to meet that existing budget, not the ones with the new expenditures, but the existing budget. And we're going to do better than that. We're going to do significantly better than that. I expect that, well, and a lot of this reason is national economy is good, but sequestration was eliminated about a year ago in Congress. Virginia benefits from defense spending greatly, so we're experiencing that, and our revenues are doing pretty well right now. I actually think that the revenue forecast is going to be at least 4%, and I think the optimistic side of me is saying greater than that this year. I can't predict 20. I don't know when a recession will occur or when a downturn will occur, because we've had a long expansion that's gone on. We've accelerated this expansion. So I can only really speak to this year. It looks pretty good this year, that at least 4%, and my guess could be a lot better than that. One of the areas of growth, though, is going to be non-withholding, and Secretary Aubrey Lane said it yesterday. A lot of people have shifted to paying, businesses are going to LLCs, they're self-employed, people like me, we pay estimated taxes, capital gains from the stock market. They're going to do well this year. They're going to do well, and they're already, you can kind of start seeing that. But we put a collar in our forecast. We put a collar on non-withholding. We have, Rick Brown started doing that because they're considered to be, in some sense, one-time revenues. They go up and down, and I've had charts in the past showing you that, how they're really non-withholding revenues go up and down, and so it's difficult to put that into operating spending over time. That's ongoing operating spending. So consider that some of that one time, although you could make the argument as our economy is shifting, a lot more of that is not one time. It's going to continue because more people are in a different type of a work environment. So that is going to limit, though, using a collar. 16% is the collar on non-withholding as a percent of total general fund revenues. That could be $200 million a year that is not put into the budget, the governor's budget. $200 million a year. So what happens? That shows up as a surplus at the end of the year. So start thinking in terms of one time to what this body, BACO, could think, where would you like one-time spending to go? So that's something that I think should go in your brain. And then also, not only this good economy and better revenues, so think about the general revenue situation with our economy. That's going to pretty much balance out the obligations. Maybe we'll do better, but it might take a while to see that with this, with the non-withholding and the tendency to not want to spend and operating. But think of that as a general balance between your unfunded budget items and the normal economic growth. Then we have the tax reform issue. And if nothing happens, and I'm not saying this is the case, something probably will happen. There's $600 to $900 million a year that are going to come into Virginia because of the impacts from federal tax reform on Virginia's income tax. And a lot of that has to do with the cap on the state and local deductions itemized and in the increase in the federal standard deduction, forcing people to take a standard deduction at the Virginia level, which at this point hasn't changed, which would raise tax revenues. And on the business side, remember they lowered the corporate tax rate to 21%, but they also did some tightening around, more tightening and loosening of what you can deduct in your business expenses. Because we at Virginia didn't lower our rate, we get the benefit in the sense of increased revenues from the tightening of business expenses that flow to the Virginia line. And so that's where these extra business revenues will come in. They are permanent. The individual changes at the federal level stop in 2024 under current law. That's another factor to consider. Are those going to be considered, those additional individual revenues going to be considered as sort of temporary one-time, how to incorporate them, or how to even give them back to the taxpayer? Because if you give them back to the taxpayer in certain ways, it's very hard to take that back, and that becomes permanent too, potentially. So there's a lot of choices that have to be made. This is the good economy news. Notice that those down points, those corresponded to the recession in 2010, the sequestration, and that mini recession we had in Virginia. Remember that $1.5 billion we thought was going to happen in budget cuts? This is the 12-month moving average of withholding, which is about 2/3 of the general fund. Okay, and so it's a great coincident indicator of our economy. It's the money in the bank from people who withheld money from their payroll checks. And it really shows the state of Virginia's economy quite well, I think. But you can see we're up at the 5% level, 12-month moving average. And so that's a good indicator of what I'm saying. The economy's doing pretty well. This is this chart that shows you, this was last year's forecast, where we got the surplus. This is all we need to make our current budget, not counting the new items that have to be put into there. But look at non-withholding. We need -3. That is not going to happen. Okay, we're going to do a lot better than that. If we put that collar on, it may not show up until a surplus happens at the end of the year. If they decide not to spend it. Hey, contingency appropriations might be a thought too in certain items. If you think there's a strong chance you're going to have a surplus. So let's take a quick look at spending over time now. Let's start looking at the budget itself. And so I want to first take you back to 2001. Well, guess what? We grew, on average, our general fund operating appropriations over that time period, compound growth of 3%. And that reflects the growth in revenues. Haven't been all that great. The Great Recession really we went up pretty good in the 2000s. The Great Recession hit. We've been kind of bumping along, not that great, up and down since then. But 3% is the average. Well, Medicaid, this has nothing to do with expansion. This is prior to expansion. 7% compound revenue growth. I've shown you this kind of stuff before. Because of lower growth in general fund revenues, higher growth in Medicaid, we've used debt to help our colleges build buildings. We haven't given them a lot of growth in operating support. We've paid for buildings. But your main source of aid from the state is K-12. 3/4 of aid to localities is through K-12. It's actually grown less than the rate of the total growth in general fund, and not that fast. 2.6%, barely above the rate of growth in inflation. In fact, it probably is if you go back to 2001. It's about inflation at that rate. So that's part of the story of why localities feel the pressure in their budgets. Here's Medicaid. So the growth rates in Medicaid, you know, that 7%, you sort of break it down, compound. And here's the forecast last year. We were supposed to get savings from managed care. When the movement, a massive move to managed care, and it didn't happen. Those savings didn't occur yet, at least. And compare that forecast really to the one over here, because the new forecast includes the savings from expansion, includes the savings in the teaching hospital disproportionate share, the savings of moving people in jail and prisons when they have to go to get hospital care. They can now be covered by Medicaid. The reduction in CSB payments, because some of those people coming in CSBs can now be paid with Medicaid. And also the provider tax that covers the 10% state share still of the expansion. Remember, we raised a hospital provider tax was instituted. So that allowed for an estimate of $371 million in biennial savings from Medicaid expansion. That's now built into this 6.2 and 2.6. It would have been those, which is more in line with sort of traditional growth, as you can see. We built in some savings from the expansion from what I just described. That's the 462 though. From the 2.334 to the 6.226. That's the 462 over the biennium. That's going to have to be put into this new budget the government introduces December 19th. So I want to just point out that it's difficult to use our credit card anymore in the state of Virginia. We still have some capacity, and as revenues get better, we'll get more capacity because we have a self-imposed cap of 5% of general fund revenues and transportation revenues. We don't want to have any more than 5% debt service in those combined revenues, and because we want to keep our AAA credit rating. What this chart shows you, though, is Virginia has used its credit card, okay, and we're actually above, the blue line, above other AAA rated states as a debt per capita compared to other states. This is last December's Treasury report. It's going to be updated, so I don't have the data yet. Hopefully we do better, but this is all states, including, so we actually have a higher debt per capita than other states, but we're still AAA rated. And that's part of the reason we've reserved more funds. But remember also, we've got $5 billion in authorized but unissued debt out there already. The General Assembly's authorized, but it has yet to be issued. So the debt service numbers that are already well over 700 million, 800 million, are going to continue to go up in the near term. Here's the reserve. That includes, the blue line is the constitutionally mandated rainy day fund. And those, the red lines, the extra reserves the General Assembly has appropriated, including that 500 million or so in last session that shows up by 2020. We have over $1 billion reserve, so we're looking better there. Now let's kind of review the budget pressures. We've got to fund the mandatory spending items I described. The biggest one being the increase in Medicaid forecast. So some of the choices that I talked about. What are the choices? Do we increase our reserves and get better liquidity to prepare ourselves for possible future downturns that we know happen from time to time? Do we budget one-time capital, one-time spending items? Because a lot of this might be viewed as one-time money. Some of this extra revenue, such as cash for capital instead of debt. Or how about shoring up our VRS teacher retirement pool with a one-time infusion? What does that do? Well, that reduces our unfunded liability, makes us look better to Wall Street, but it also reduces the rates the state and localities have to pay pretty much forever. And the teacher pool, I believe, is like 72% funded. They like to have it more like 85%. That's considered to be pretty well funded, somewhere in that range. But if you do that, you get some benefits, and you're using that one-time revenue that also reduce your costs, because you pay the VRS rates. Right now they're at 16% or so. So if we can reduce that, that saves you money as well. So that's an option. But also, you're going to have to consider modifying Virginia's tax code because of those federal changes. Virginia taxpayers are going to pay more. How much revenue do we return in response to those federal changes? Finally, the the cuts to K-12, for example, and other cuts, basically that occurred back in 2010, have not been restored. And so you can, and I'll show you some detail on that in a second. But so there's budget pressures to restore that, to use some of this good time, better times money in restoring K-12 funding and also improving mental health. I'm not going to really spend too much time. This is the adopted budget last year. This is going to change. You can see how we didn't grow our Medicaid, general fund Medicaid spending very much in that adopted budget. That's going to change. We did grow K-12 funding pretty good in the first year, but it pretty much grew at the rate of inflation. Even with the teacher salary increase budget for the second year, it just grew a little bit better than the rate of inflation last year in what was adopted. And here again is the debt service lines. Over 800 million is in the budget. So that's a larger and larger share of our budget is debt service. This is what goes back to localities in last year's adopted budget. You can see I've shown you this chart. In 09 was sort of the high water mark. We raised taxes in 05. The economy was good. The General Assembly and Governor were putting more and more money into K-12. That came to a halt because of the recession. And as a percent of the general fund, we've sort of hovered at a little less than 30%, and that really hasn't changed over time. In total, other aid to locality items, CSA, the mental health, community CSBs in there, Sheriff Department 599 funding, constitutional officers, that all has declined from about 52% the high water mark of the general fund down to 43.5% or so. So that's again, Medicaid, increased Medicaid spending, not that great of growth in general funds. Localities, you know, a good chunk of the general fund is spent on money going to you. And so that's where it had you can feel a lot of the pressures in the budget to balance the budget. Also last year, I really kind of termed the changes to the K-12 in the initial adopted budget as relatively minor. The re-benchmarking basically funds inflation, so think of it that way. And it basically funds it in the first year, but not necessarily even in the second year, because it's all off the base year of 2018. So 2019 and 2020, yes, it gets raised 200, 250 million, but it's the same each year. You know, and it's going in. And so when you hear we've increased K-12 funding by 500, that's true over the base year, but it's not necessarily true from 2019 to 2020. Okay, and you are having to pay for that second year of expenditure, second year of inflation. And really re-benchmarking, it's even kind to say it funds inflation in the second year. But they did several other things. You know, they put a 3% salary increase, but you have to cover about 55 to 60% of the cost, because not everyone is covered by the SOQ, first of all, plus the state shares of the SOQ is 55%, local share is 45%, but there's a third of school employees in Virginia that aren't covered by the SOQ at all. And you fund 100% of those costs. There was additional monies had to put in because we've been using the literary fund to pay for teacher retirement. It got below a certain threshold. We had to put money back into that, actually. So that was money that was having to be put back into the literary fund. And so those are really the big items. Also, they did increase lottery flexible funding to 40%. And to do that, they had to put some general funds in to free up some lottery funds that were being used for other education items. And so they put some money in there. So those are the main changes to the K-12 budget. I termed relatively minor. It certainly was not restoring the cuts from 2010. And you can see the chart. This has everything in it. Lottery funds, general funds, and a little bit of non-general funds, that very little, but that go to K-12. And this chart, the blue line, is the nominal dollars per pupil that the state provides to local school divisions. And the high water mark again was 09. It reached that, it got back to that high water mark in 2017 when it hit 5271. Hitting the wrong button here. And it's exceeded that now, but if you take just the CPI and you create a real per pupil expenditure, you can see that it's about $400 per pupil less now in real terms than it was in 09. And it's kind of in the second year, as I've kind of described about how the second year really barely basically funds inflation, you can see it's leveled off in that second year, that last red line. So has not restored the cuts from 2010. I kind of mentioned this already. We fully fund. I don't like the term. We need to, we need to fully fund standards of quality. Let's be clear. We do fund standards of quality because the standards of quality are defined by the General Assembly, and we do fully fund what they define as the standards of quality. What's left out of the standard of quality is those 1/3 positions, and a lot of that was a result of capping support costs in 2010, and then the expenditures were reduced for other outside the classroom support expenditures, the main. So the SOQ was redefined in 2010, and now it's funded, but it's redefined. So really, if you want more SOQ funding, you've got to redefine the SOQs up. You've got to put more things in it. And the Board of Education in 2016 recommended $600 million in SOQ improvements. And a lot of that had to do with improving funding for support positions and adding other positions. I think guidance counselors, school nurses, funding more assistant principals, things like that. So they're adding people into the SOQ to be covered by the state. One of the outcomes of that is of a SOQ that is not as broad as what you do, is you average 100% more on your required local effort than the state requires you to match through your composite index, the standards of quality, etc. You put 100% more than what you're required in on average. You can see it varies by locality, some a lot more. Arlington County, for example, is 200%. I think they're pretty much the highest. They're 200% of what they're required to put in, what they actually pay from the local level. Now let's take a little look at what I think is like a canary in the coal mine, and that's teacher salaries, about sort of the ratcheting down on our budgets for schools. You can see in the better years, from 2002 to 09, when it really was growing, K-12 funding, state K-12 funding, the average pay per teacher was $11,000 more from 02 to 09. So it was pretty good. But the increase in pay from 09 to 17, when the budget's been more constrained, has only been about $4,000. And if it just grew at the rate of the CPI, average teacher pay in Virginia would be $62,000 in that year, 2017. It'd be more now, 2019. But the latest data I have on a statewide basis, it would have been $62,000. So we did not keep up with the growth in inflation in average teacher pay across the Commonwealth. And so you look at compared to other states, and so someone asked me at the VML conference, well, what's the cost of living in Virginia? How does that compare? And so I kind of thought of a proxy, and that's home prices. And Zillow has a really interesting home value index that's pretty accurate, I believe, of all houses. And Virginia shows up as the 16th highest on Zillow's median home value index. But we don't show up on this latest teacher salary survey of NEA until 32. So we have a higher cost of living, but we don't keep up with our teacher pay, and that cost of living is what that tells me. And I've told people this, other people have talked about it as well. If you take Planning District 8, the 8 localities in Northern Virginia, out of that number right there, 53,000, that puts us down at 47,000, the average for the rest of the state. And that's the bottom 5. That's the bottom 5 states in average teacher pay. So Northern Virginia moves our average up quite a bit. They pay to compete with Maryland and Washington, D.C., so they're up there in that similar range. You can see.
They also get a cost of compete supplement from the state, which other localities do not in regards to teacher salaries.
Is that Ruby?
That's Ruby.
Hi, Ruby. Yeah, but remember, that cost of competing, that goes through the composite index.
I understand.
So the value of that is not nearly as high as what
But
people
I'm right
think.
next to Maryland and Charles County, and
Right.
I don't get it.
So what it is it's a competing. You're competing for teachers. You're competing not only for other teachers that are being paid. You're competing with the general economy. You have a good economy. It's tough to compete for young people, especially to go into that profession. They get paid better somewhere else. So it's definitely the competition for teachers is going on. Here's how, in a little different look, about who's paying for public education. The federal government pays still. It went up to 10.9 in the when we had the ARRA, what was the term for that? What was it? What was it? There was a term. Yeah, that was right, but there was a term for it. I'm forgetting right now. So the federal government for basically 1 year really helped supplement our education fund, about $500 million worth. A little bit in the next year as well, of 2011. But you can see now it's about 7% they provide. The state share has gone down to 41.5, 27, and you've grown from 48.6 to 51.3. So local government's providing more of the overall funding in Virginia. And this comes right out of the superintendent's annual report. Interesting, I wanted to show you the impact of underfunding VRS. And that was done to help save money. We reduced our contribution rates back, particularly in 2010, because we had a budget crisis. But the impact of that, the blue line is what the actuaries and the board, VRS board, said should have been contributed, so the rate should have been. The red line is what actually was. So we've kind of underfunded it for many, many years, what the actuaries said should have been put in to the teacher pool. The blue line is what the rates would have been if the blue dotted line is what would be the rates if we had fully funded according to the actuaries. And so the difference is 11.9 versus 16.3. And there's a $7.5 billion teacher base, so you can kind of go in your head. If you're paying 5%, let's say 5% less, $7.5 billion, that's hundreds of millions of dollars in less payments by both the state and localities. So there's a cost, and the cost basically goes forever. You have a higher rate until you catch up. So you have to pay more to catch up. Also, one of the big issues this year is school construction. And so I wanted to show you a chart on the expenditures at the local level outside of operating for school construction. This is not the debt service, but the actual cost of the new middle schools, high schools, and additions, renovations from 2013 to 2017. This is $2.6 billion. It's a very large number. And in my view, it's probably constrained because of the revenue, situation at the local level. They can't really afford and you hear, for example, Richmond and Norfolk too, and other places that I'm familiar with, they've put off renovating, building new schools, and the money's just not there. So it could be higher. And South Side, Southwest, you've heard about their issues as well. They've been publicly talked about. So this could be a lot higher. And so it's a big money problem. Is where does the money come from to build and renovate new schools? This chart right here is sort of the summary, what I see, and is used as, I think, a resolution with VML and VACO to the General Assembly, some of the education funding. These I've basically talked about them all now, so I don't need to sit here and review this. But there's ideas out there that the state could do. Simple ideas, for example. If you you don't change the SOQ, you leave it as is, but you raise the state share from 55 to something higher, you don't need to really change. It's just money. Each 1 point would cost the state an additional $93 million at this point, approximately. So if they went to 56% of the current SOQ, that would cost that much money. Again, it's a money issue to help you, not only operation, but afford for renovating and constructing new schools, paying the debt service. Other changes that happened last session in the General Assembly was the increased funding for Go Virginia, and I think that's a really interesting effort to improve economic development in Virginia. I've looked at some of the projects. A lot of it's training positions, really it's workforce training, a lot of it in specific industries that you do well in your region. Some good ideas, but I think it's gotten off to a little bit of a slow start, so I encourage you guys to really get in there, roll up your sleeves, and think of ideas and projects that will help your economies. Just one aside, they did fully fund the growth rate in aid to police, which hadn't happened in a number of years, and we aren't back to the 200 million level, which sort of was the high mark 10 years ago, but they fully funded the growth in the last budget. They had to continue putting more money into CSA. I'm going to talk about that in a second, the Child Services Act, because special ed day placements keep growing, and there's going to be some studies on how to try to control that. as well going on right now. In the meantime, they've put a 2% cap on the rate increases by those providers. And there's been money put into, if you went back to that chart on aid to localities, one of the growth areas has been money into mental health. And so that's been a priority for Virginia, is improving access for mental health services. And that showed up again last year during the General Assembly. So what are the needs going forward for localities besides K-12? You know, additional CSB funding, a lot of it mental health related, you know, fully funding the STEP Virginia, improvements to mental health, same-day access, transportation services, and there's a question for CSBs as to whether, I think out here, you might, whether or not the cuts to CSBs because of Medicaid expansion will actually come to pass, or will you need that money to continue the services? Is there really that economies of scale that you can cut back funding? That's still an open question that I don't know has been answered yet. We talked a little bit about, and I'm going to show you a chart on private day placement growth through the Child Services Act. Many more kids are being diagnosed with autism. That's continuing to grow rapidly, and nobody really has a good handle on why. We do have to provide the service. It's a mandatory service to provide these children, you know, education services. Whether or not Medicaid, we're going to fully fund Medicaid expansion costs for local social service departments. You know, they can handle the volume of new people coming in is a question. I have heard some good news just at this conference. Someone was telling me they thought that the money was there, but that remains to be seen still for that. What else on here I want to highlight? Well, another one-time item. You got one-time money. Fund put more money into stormwater local assistance funds. You know, if that's a priority. Think about that. Also, I'm going to show you a couple slides on non-general fund transportation funding and why that's going to become a larger and larger issue in my view. So there's the CSA. And the good news is it flattened out, because some of the foster care, therapeutic, residential, a decline in residential care, putting them into homes, you know, that went down. But the alternative, the bottom line, that increased from 17 to 18, almost 10%. So it's continuing to grow, and the numbers served, I should have put 17 in here, it's grown 30% from 14, and the annual cost has grown 30%. Well, from 17 to 18, it grew 10% of that. So there has been no slowdown in that private day placement portion of Child Services Act, which local governments have to match, by the way. They provide about a 1/3 match on average to the state funds. So let's talk a little bit about transportation funding. So we raised taxes back in 2013, and we bumped it up really in a one-time way because our revenue sources are not the best sources that grow with the economy. Think about motor fuel taxes, switching to get more fuel-efficient cars, switching to electric vehicles. You know, it's a more efficient system in a lot of senses in terms of motor fuels. That's not going to be a great growing revenue source. You know, vehicle sales is cyclical. Sometimes it's better than other times. Sales taxes haven't been that great, although they're better this year, so it's helping transportation. But long term, sales taxes have not grown nearly the rate as income taxes. They don't capture the entire economy. They don't capture the service-based economy, which we're moving more and more to. So sales taxes over a long term, yeah, we're going to get internet taxes that it looks like better, so that's going to help. But over a longer term, sales taxes are not the best reflection of the economy either. You know, as you move more and more to a service-based economy. And then we exempt a lot of things from sales taxes. So think of it almost as a one-time boost in 2013 that played out over a couple of years because it was phased in. And now we're kind of leveling off again in our transportation revenues. And we knew back in 2013 that we were underfunded maintenance, particularly secondary roads. And so that's why this line grew 19% from 2013 to now. Construction, because of the tax, only grew 7% of that. That's total, not annual average. That's total. So it's kind of starting. You're kind of starting to see that we haven't really solved our problem. A couple other slides. So this is the VDOT 6-year plan in total revenues. Now I want you to notice this line. You see growth there? It's flat. completely flat. The amount of revenue is completely flat. Part of that is what I talked about, the sources. Part of that is flat revenue, federal revenues. Maybe the federal government will step up to the plate and raise their revenues through an increased maybe gas tax. They haven't raised their gas tax forever, hardly, in a long, long time. But we also use debt, more debt in the past, and we don't really have that capacity anymore. So there's not a whole lot of new debt, either bonds, showing up in the 6-year plan. Because we've used it in the past a lot more to shore up our transportation issues that we had prior to 2013 in particular. So then look at the 6-year plan. Here's the construction line. Because maintenance is growing, revenues are flat. And I was in Stratford at a VACO meeting about a month ago, and the outlying areas of that region in that district up there were talking about how their secondary roads were in good shape. So we know it's almost unlimited, the amount of maintenance money we can put into the highway system. It's a massive highway, and it's almost unlimited. Now, I viewed the smart scale process, which is a good process in selecting who gets construction money. I think it's better than what we had. It's not perfect. I know everyone has complaints about this or that of it, but it's a pretty good process, I think. Here's the thing that struck me, though. In the last round, 2018, it's a 2-year funding round, there was $8.6 billion in requested funding and only $1 billion was funded, 12%. That's pretty much statewide. Everyone got about that amount, a little more, a little less here and there. Some priority projects, like some of the expansions of 95, got a little bit more, got some more in the Fredericksburg area, particularly in the first round, and then supplemental 2018. But that gives you, I viewed that, I used to work in Center Finance, I was a transportation analyst, and we were always trying to get needs lists. Needs lists, develop a needs list for us. What do we need out there? And it was like pulling teeth to get one. Well, Smart Scale kind of forced a needs list because everyone was applying for what their highest level needs, and so I kind of viewed that as a needs list. Well, that's the last good needs list because there were so many requests for money that they've limited the applications that you can have now. So it won't be as good. But we kind of got a sense that we have $8 billion in needs at that time, and we could fund only of high priority needs, by the way. And I looked at the Northern Virginia ones at that meeting. They were all good projects. Not a lot, only a certain amount got funded, I showed you, that 12%. So that gives you an idea, and that declining construction number of what the issue in transportation is to me. It's pretty clear. It's not enough revenues to do what we need to do. Now, the local revenue situation. So what I found interesting here, from last year to this year, look, the counties have done better. Their revenue sources grew and caught up to the rate of inflation. So from 09 to 17, you grew about 25%. The state, this reflects the slowdown in state support. Federal's in here too, you got 21% growth. That's matched population inflation for counties. And it wasn't like, we were below that last year, so you've kind of caught up. I suspect 18 is going to be decent, so you're probably starting to do better at the local level too with your revenues. The cities are still behind. They only got 11% total growth, population of 17%. Here's why. So this is total locality. Your most important source of revenue is the real estate tax. Well, the state income tax from 09 has grown 38%. That's significantly better than real estate tax growth from that time period through 17. Again, the latest data I have. We know that the state income tax actually grew 8.1% in fiscal 18. A lot of it was not withholding. Better withholding a lot of it. So that line is going to go up 8% for 18. I seriously doubt local revenue real estate went up 8%. So that gap will continue to widen. Now, why did cities not do as well? There's a pretty good gap, not 38% growth. You're at about 23.5%, 24% growth in real estate tax in counties, but look at the cities, 13% growth. So the city real estate taxes have not grown nearly as fast as counties. And the cities, to get that 13% growth, they had to raise their median tax rate 17 cents. To get your growth, you had to raise it 12 cents since 09. So it's not just assessments, it's tax increases that are producing that real estate growth at the local level. And when you compare us to other states, we rely more on localities, on our localities for revenue than the state compared to other states. State taxes are relatively speaking per capita in the 30s, and if you look at it as a percent of personal income, we're in the 40s as a percent of wealth. We're even lower than that on our local tax situation. But the local funding is, we're down in the mid-teens compared to other states. So we raise more money, relatively speaking, at the local level compared to other states. And again, showing up, even though we're wealthy, not as wealthy as we were, because our economy in Virginia actually, from 2009 to here, has not performed as well as the U.S. So we've decreased in wealth. Hopefully that's going to change. And we are lately start growing at the rate of the country, and we'd like to exceed that again, like we used to do, and become wealthier. But compared to our teacher pay and our school funding, we're not as good as our wealth. Let's talk a little bit about the federal tax changes now, because that's going to be a huge issue for the General Assembly, I believe, this year. We know that this was the most substantial legislation since '86. A lot of provisions didn't have an impact, but there were 10 provisions that did. And on the left, this is what increased. Sorry. The ones on the top is what increased revenue to Virginia if we do nothing. So mainly on the individual side, it's the capping of the itemized deduction, which forces people into taking the state standard deduction because they raised the federal standard deduction. So a combination of those two things. That's most of the individual side. But on the business side, as I described, remember they lowered rates at the federal level, but all those on the right-hand side at the top, they tightened up business deductions, exemptions, etc., which will raise revenue at the Virginia level. And it's more than at the bottom, which decreased revenue. So here's the net result if we do nothing in Virginia. The first year, 2019, is really a year and a half of revenue. It's all of tax year 18 and half of 19. And so that's why it's a little larger individual than the second year. But you can see it's growing, but it ends in 2024, the individual. That's when the current law ends. But the business provisions get to start raising some pretty significant money over time, that tightening of business provisions. So that's permanent at this point in time, the current federal law. So how you structure tax reform is sort of important to understand how this is working as well. Now, briefly, I did a little analysis of who's the winner and loser. It's a little different than Secretary Lane showed yesterday in the Senate in the Finance Committee. I showed it as a percent of the total what's owed. So this is the federal impact of the federal reform on Virginia if we do nothing. And the winners are, in terms of percent of total liability, are the lower and middle income. Their percent of the total federal tax from Virginians goes down from, for example, 50 to 100, from 27.8 to 25.7. So they got more back from the federal reform in general than they currently pay as a percent. So it will reduce their liability. The high income actually are paying more. As an example, it's interesting. I never saw this data until Cambridge did this analysis. We have 1% of our filers are over 500,000. That's about 37,000 filers have greater than 500,000 income, and there's about 11,000 filers that have over $1 million in annual income. And you can see those over that 1%. They pay almost 30% right now of the federal tax revenue going to Washington out of Virginians. That will go up to almost 31%. So in other words, they got back less, and they did get a tax cut in general, but less than the percentage they're currently paying. So the percent of the total take goes up. Now it switches the impact on Virginia. It switches. The wealthier actually, because it's a lot less money, because they pay, it's a lot less. Now, they only pay only 18% of Virginia. We have a less progressive tax system in Virginia. We stop our rate at 575 at 17,000. And so these top 1% only pay 18% of Virginia's income taxes. That goes down a little bit. It goes down a little bit for this. It goes up a little bit for the middle and lower. Stays almost the same for the under 25, but a little bit lower. Now if you combine the two, so if you're looking at a combined tax system, what we pay, what Virginians, if nothing changes, it still is going to be the upper income are going to pay more, relatively speaking, of the total tax burden on income tax, just on income tax. You can't count sales and property and all that, just income. And the under 25 pretty much stay the same. The 50 to 150 are going to do a little bit better. They're going to do a little bit better under the combined income tax. So it's to me, it was interesting when you're thinking about reform, what the current situation is. Now, the last issue I want to talk about is the Wayfair decision on sales taxes. So that's another opportunity, and as Secretary Lane said yesterday, it's been spent probably a dozen times. But it's not as much money. First of all, it's not as much money as people think, because the estimates that you heard of 250, 300 million were prior to Amazon collecting, and prior to other large internet dealers who started collecting when Amazon started collecting. And plus, since the Wayfair decision, we've got evidence that others have started voluntarily collecting. So yes, it might be 300 million if you went back 3 years and said the impact of all these internet dealers might even be more than that, because I believe it's probably greater than 5%, and 300 million is about 5% of total sales. Do you think that internet you buy, is there more than 5% sold on the internet now? Probably. So if you said all internet, then yeah, it's probably at least 300 million. But going forward, it's not, because we're already collecting a lot of it. Amazon, Wayfair, as an example, is already collecting. They do business in Virginia. They collect sales taxes now. The one that had the suit. So it's not a panacea. And if you're the one proposal to use it for school construction, I want to point out, this chart is based on showing you dollars for 265 million plus the regional taxes. Secretary Lane said yesterday, going forward it's probably only like 150 million. So you can adjust it down. But the point I'm making is still the same, in that if you were going to use it for school construction, you would have to take away at least 265 million. You'd have to take it in your local 1% option away. It's just money. You want that money. So that's not going to happen. You'd have to take the 0.9% away from transportation. And I just described the transportation funding issues. We already sent 1.375 back for public education through the school-age population distribution and the SOQ composite distribute that goes into the amount that goes into public ed. And then we've got about 2% left in unrestricted general fund. But guess what? Public ed gets a third of the general fund. So you already get a good chunk of that. So there really isn't a lot there, this is my opinion, to redistribute somewhere else. And it really comes down to school construction. You just need more money some way, somehow. I'll give you an example on that. So the literary fund has been used instead of general funds to pay for teacher retirement. That's authorized by the common use of it, but there's no more money basically left to help your school construction costs, because it's being used for teacher retirement. So one way is to use general funds. You got to come up with the money somehow. It's just, again, a money issue. Use general funds for teacher retirement, free up the literary funds, which are several hundred million a year. That could now be dedicated to school construction. But it takes general funds to substitute for the literary fund money. So again, more money, somehow. Either better economy, higher taxes, keeping some of the reform money for uses. That's a big debate. I go back to that chart I had about what are the decision points. Certainly, taxpayers are going to have to pay more Virginia taxes. So there's going to be an issue there. Some of it temporary, some of it permanent. The delegates in the room have a lot of work cut out for them this session. A lot of issues, a lot of choices that have to be made that impact the future. And so I hope it wasn't too quick. I hope that was understandable. Maybe that was way too long, but happy to answer any questions that you have. Yes, sir.
You mentioned
I can't hear you, sir.
SOQ standards. You mentioned that those apply our collective. Are they written properly?
Well, I didn't necessarily say they were likely to
No, and
change.
I may be saying it out of time, but I'm just asking a question. SOQ standards broken,
Are they broken?
yeah, as far as what
There's
they're-
not one school system that operates with the SOQs, and they all operate above SOQs.
And I'll give you an example, like.
Well, there's your answer right there. So she's, I mean, that chart that said people all overmatch the requirement, that's because the SVQ doesn't cover the way it's defined
I
right now.
understand, but if the standard's written to say this many students, you should have this many principals or assistant principals, that's way off base. Seems like that standard needs to be put in order.
Well, I'll just say that that's the reason the State Board of Education recommended 600 million in changes. And my belief is the General Assembly understands this. It's just a matter of having enough money. And so you have to either have a better economy or raise taxes. Raising taxes is not easy. So, yes, sir.
You said we had, I think you said the state had $5 billion in bonds that were unissued.
Authorized but not issued yet.
Authorized but not issued. Is there any possibility that they could issue some of those bonds for school, one-time expense of school maintenance and school construction?
Well, it would be a new authorization. Because the current authorization are for specific projects that have already been in the state's capital plan. A lot of that being state buildings, probably the General Assembly building is in there. I don't know that for a fact. I'm sure it is, because they issue them as the money is needed. And so these projects are often fairly long. They're in planning stages. They know they're going to have to do them. So they don't issue it all right away. They authorize and say, we're going to help you build this building college, and it'll take you 5 years to plan and build it. It's, and so it's a money management.
Yeah. So, last year, the General Assembly dealt with the issue of metro funding in Northern Virginia. And a good deal of what they did was take money out of the MBTA. So you mentioned Smart Scale program. If Northern Virginia starts applying for more Smart Scale money, because there will not be as much money available for the MBTA source, how will that impact transportation money Commonwealth-wide?
Well, it depends on how high of a priority they score in the Smart Scale. Remember, there's two pools.
Right.
There's
But
district-wide pools.
If it's congestion relief, they're going to score high.
Well, there's more than one factor. There's safety, there's economic development, there's other factors in there, some of it's state, half of it approximately is statewide, you score on a statewide priority basis. The other half is each district has monies allocated to it, and the districts determine their priorities in Smart Scale. So the likelihood, as I agree with you, that you move from Metro, some of these Northern Virginia projects will impact the statewide pool, yes, for everyone else. That's likely.
You said in your slide, 3% pay raise for teachers, but 60% funded by the local economy.
Right.
Is that 3% mandated to SOQ positions, or do you know if they could take and give teachers a 2% raise, which would help offset some of the non-SOQ positions?
That's a good question. I think it's, you have to provide a 3% raise. And the 3%, the money, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just money. Maybe someone could help me with this. But the 3% is really used to determine the amount the state is going to provide. So they say 3% for all SOQ covered positions for this time period will cost X. And I think it was 130 million. So sometimes they mandate, sometimes it's just money. They give you the money, and you can determine how much exactly in raises you're going to give.
Because there's some local governments that will be able to do that. But I noticed that the state employees are getting a 2% pay raise.
Right.
But teachers are not.
Maybe somebody can help me with that money, that 130 million. Are you mandated to give 3% to everyone? Probably not. Probably just you get a certain amount of money based on the state share of a 3% salary increase.
But what happens is the state comes out and says, we want to give 3%. So what the money that the localities get, then we have to make up. So
Right.
it turned out to be a 3%. And I hear it's, I've come to everyone, when I was on school board, I came to your talks, and I appreciate this so much. It's always so informative. It's so frustrating because the General Assembly, I realize raising taxes is really tough, but we get stuck on having to do it on the local level because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And so somebody's raising taxes, and it's us. And we have to in order to do this. And No, anyway, sorry, that I went off on a tangent, but anyway, thank you for what you're doing.
In the past, on the teacher raises, they've been required to be passed through to the teachers. I think in the last biennium, the raise could be given at either year of the biennium, even though it was funded in the second year of the biennium. But if you didn't give 3%, you didn't get it.
I think also the last time they did it, it also included in the past, has been just instructional positions. They also expanded it to cover other support positions.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to double check on that. I should know that, but I just forget right now exactly how that worked this time.
Carrying a lot of
So,
it.
yeah. Anyone else? Yes, sir, in the back.
Yeah, the state technology initiative for schools has been going on for a long time, and I believe that's,
For who?
for schools, the
Oh,
state
yeah.
technology initiative.
Right.
Has it achieved its goals, and can it be curtailed in order to gain that capacity for the state?
The technology initiative has been going on, right, for like 18 years, I believe, and they use literary funds to pay the debt service on VPSA debt. They issue debt, VPSA debt, and they use a literary fund to pay that debt service. So whether it's achieved its goals, you know, I'm sure that's almost an unlimited, again, you know, I'm being a little facetious, but, you know, technology is always advancing, and you're always needing help with new technology, so I'm sure you continue to use that money and need it. Probably use more. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I have a general, I guess, statement. If you're a local official, you better start getting your checkbook out. I mean, all this presentation, you know, is all about spending other people's money. As less comes from the federal government, less is coming from the state government, more is coming required from Medicaid, state, less for the schools, sitting on a couple different other boards. You know, we're already seeing, you know, with social services, you know, increased costs on the local budget, you know, just in our county, $11,000 a year. You know, these are all unfunded mandates, and if you're on the local government, you know, you better get your checkbook out, because the state's not going to be putting in the money for this program. We're going to be pulling out and passing it on.
Yes, sir.
What do you see as the impact of the end of the Federal Highway Trust Fund on transportation funding for the state? Coming up in 21, I believe the Highway Trust Fund's running out of dollars. There's no plan currently to
Right.
fill
Well,
that?
I mean, I showed you the chart on there was a chart on federal funding. It's pretty flat. I mean, that could change. There is, you know, I saw Ray LaHood talking the other day about the need, you know, wanting to lobby the federal government to raise its gas tax. You know, they've probably reached into the general fund already at the federal level to maintain the amount of allocations for transportation, because they haven't raised the federal 18-cent federal gas tax in, I don't know, 20, 30 years. So, again, you know, the federal government is going to do what it's going to do, and you know, 2021 is a long time from now. So.
Also in 2021, you have several car manufacturers stating they're going to go to all electric. So how are we going to keep that gas tax formula working for us if they manage to fulfill that, and we have several car manufacturers that can only electric cars?
Yeah, that's why I kind of mentioned that. I said that really the funding source of transportation is going to become an issue. The funding source, it already is an issue, that shows you. So something's going to give on how we fund our transportation system in the medium term.
You know, I'm also worried about what the cost is for local government, and particularly in the area of our transportation needs, our schools, our jails. But it all really does come from, we're all kind of competing for the same resource, the dollars that go into a taxable, whether it's local, state, or federal. I think what I see here is there are efforts being made to move forward with areas of discrepancy. And at some point, we got to understand, if we want more, it's going to cost us. I mean, that's the reality. I've argued with by fighting for Interstate 81, not a bit of it's going to be improved until we figure out a way to pay for it. You know, our schools aren't going to be paid for, or built, or remodeled until we figure out a way to pay for it. Our teachers aren't going to get raises until we figure out how to pay for it. It is a shared responsibility, and I think maybe now we're finally getting closer to that difficult crossroads to talk about real tax reform in the Commonwealth of Virginia and how local government and state government can redefine whose responsibilities are what and how we're going to pay for them. I mean, we've kind of gotten away from it over the years because, you know, we multiply what people do and what people don't do. We need to sit down and say, who's responsible for what? And that's then they have to come up with means to pay for it. But counties' dilemmas are that we don't have the same taxing authorities that cities and towns have. And we need some tax reform relief there. At the same time, there are, you know, I live in a town that's going to do away with real estate tax. And that amazing, I paid my last real estate tax bill in December. My utility tax, though, is going to go up. But, you know, so it's a choice matter. But I think the bottom line really does come down that we're going to struggle through the same issues we've been struggling with until we sit down at the table collectively and reform the whole tax system of Virginia to make it equitable and doable for the things that we want and we need. And we've got to make some tough decisions, both at the state level and the federal level. I mean, we can't constantly demand things that we can't pay for. And if we're not willing to come up with the means to pay for it, then we just have to understand it's not going to get done. And we have to live with those decisions. And other people will probably replace us if we don't. And then they'll live with the same dilemma that we live. But you know, Jim, I think this presentation is very reflective of what you've been saying for years. And it leads directly to that point that it's time to sit down and have a true discussion on that, a real meaning discussion, where all parties are at the same table talking about it. And there are going to be disagreements about it, but we've got to find that common ground. I think we can.
Yeah, and I think there's an opportunity this year. That's why I said at the very beginning, this sort of opportunity is almost forced on us because of the federal changes. So
Right.
There's an opportunity to have this discussion this year.
Any other questions?
Thank you.